Imagine waking up, stepping outside, and boom, your backyard has transformed into the wedding of the century. Guests mingling, a full buffet set up, and even a DJ blasting music like your lawn is the hottest dance floor in town. But there was just one problem: nobody invited me. If HOA Karen thought she could turn my property into her personal wedding venue, she was in for a reception she'd never forget. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But at 7:30 a.m., the sound of hammering, laughter, and someone shouting about centerpieces proved otherwise. Peeking through the blinds, I nearly did a double take. My backyard wasn't just occupied, it was packed. White chairs were being lined up in rows. A huge flower arrangement sat under a wooden arch at the edge of my lawn. Tables were being draped with linen cloths. And smack in the middle of it all, there she was, Karen. If you live in an HOA neighborhood, you already know the type. Karen wasn't just a board member, she was the HOA. The type who had a ruler to measure your grass, who sent emails about trash cans being visible from the street for longer than 11 minutes. She ran this neighborhood like a tiny dictatorship, and now she was standing in my backyard, directing what looked like a full-blown wedding setup. I stormed outside in my pajamas. "Karen," I yelled. She turned like she was expecting me, lips tight, clipboard in hand. "Oh, good morning. I was hoping you'd be up soon. Why are there people in my backyard?" She looked around casually. "We're setting up for my daughter's wedding." "Don't worry, we'll clean up everything afterward." "You didn't ask me for permission," I said, trying to stay calm. "Oh, but we sent you a notice 2 weeks ago. We posted it in the HOA newsletter," she said with a smirk. "I don't read your newsletter. This is my yard." She shrugged. "You didn't object, so we assumed you were okay with it. It's just for today. And technically, under the HOA's Community Events Clause, the board can designate temporary usage of common spaces." I blinked at her. "This isn't a common space, this is private property." Karen's smile didn't budge. "You might want to check your deed. There's a shared use easement on the side of your yard. That technically gives the board some authority during events." I stared at her, stunned. I didn't even know how to respond to that level of audacity. I knew she was full of it. No way the HOA had the right to do this, but Karen never played fair. She played fast and dirty. She was using bogus clauses, made-up rules, and the fact that most people wouldn't question her. "Karen, I'm telling you right now, this is not happening." Her expression changed. She dropped the nice act. "If you try to stop this, you'll be in violation of several HOA policies. Unauthorized obstruction of an approved community function, violation of neighbor cooperation standards. I could fine you $2,000 by Monday." I crossed my arms. "You're threatening me on my own lawn," she leaned in. "It's already happening. The florist is on her way. The catering truck arrives in 20 minutes. If you try to shut this down, I'll make sure the board buries you in violations for the next year." That was Karen's real power, fear. She didn't need real rules, just people too tired or busy to push back. I had two options: try to call the police and hope they saw it my way, or wait, think, hit her where it hurt. I went back inside and called my buddy Evan. He's a property attorney, not flashy but sharp as a blade. I gave him the rundown. "She's hosting a wedding on your lawn," he repeated, "and she claims HOA authority." "Exactly," I said. "What can I do?" "Don't do anything physical, don't interfere. Let her hang herself. I'll send over a deed lookup and pull the HOA bylaws. Just document everything. Take photos, record everything. This is about to be a legal goldmine." I hung up and grabbed my phone. I took video of the entire yard, the tables, the chairs, the people I'd never seen in my life. I zoomed in on Karen, still barking orders. I took a snapshot of the catering truck pulling into my driveway like it belonged there. And then I did something I don't usually do. I waited. Because the wedding wasn't happening yet. The damage, the trespassing, the lies, all that was still unfolding. I knew Karen was pushing her luck. She thought she could manipulate the rules like always, but this time, she chose the wrong guy. By 10 a.m., the whole street was buzzing. Guests were arriving. People in suits and dresses were parking along the sidewalk, stepping onto my grass like it was a public park. Karen didn't just use my yard, she invited the entire neighborhood to watch. At 10:30, the music started. A live string quartet, right in front of my garden beds. I watched from my upstairs window, phone still recording. That's when I noticed something new: a photographer was inside my house. I bolted downstairs and ran into the kitchen to find a woman adjusting a lens near my back door. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" "Oh," she said, startled. "Karen said I could take a few interior shots. She said the groom would be coming through this way for the first look photos." "You need to leave, now." But I didn't let her finish. "This is trespassing, get out of my house." She grabbed her camera and scurried out. I shut the door, locked it, and stood there shaking. This wasn't just rude anymore, this was criminal. I checked my phone. Evan had sent me a text. "Confirmed. Your deed has no easement clause. HOA has no authority over your yard. You're in the clear. You want me to contact the police, or do you want to handle this your way?" I texted back. "Let me handle it, because I had a plan." Karen thought today was going to be perfect, that she could use her title to bulldoze over my rights, that I'd sit quietly and let her take over. But what she didn't know was, I wasn't just angry, I was ready, and this was just the beginning. By the time 11 o'clock a.m. rolled around, my backyard looked like a full-blown wedding venue. Guests were pouring in. Karen was floating around in some oversized hat like the queen of the neighborhood. Everyone was smiling, sipping mimosas, and walking all over my lawn like it was some public event center. But none of them knew the storm that was coming. Inside my house, I was setting the plan in motion. I had photos, videos, and proof that not only was Karen lying about having permission, she dragged the entire HOA into a legal mess. I wasn't going to stop the wedding just yet. No, that would give her the chance to play the victim, spin it like I ruined her daughter's special day. Instead, I wanted her to have it all: the crowd, the ceremony, the speeches, and then I'd pull the rug out from under her in front of everyone. And just to be sure I wasn't missing anything, I opened my laptop and checked my outdoor cameras. I'd installed them after Karen's last stunt with my fence, violating community uniformity. The system recorded everything, and what I saw made my blood boil even more. There was Karen, showing people around like it was a public garden tour. "This is where the couple will exchange vows," she said, gesturing to my koi pond. "Isn't it stunning?" People nodded. They actually applauded her. I didn't even know these people. Most of them weren't even from the neighborhood. She turned my private backyard into an open event space. And then I saw her leading a caterer inside my garage. Nope, that was it. I walked outside, calmly. The music was playing. Guests were seated. Stephanie, the bride, Karen's daughter, was standing at the edge of the yard in her gown, waiting for the cue. Karen spotted me instantly and rushed over like she owned the place. "Jake," she hissed, her smile forced. "What are you doing out here?" "Watching the crime scene," I said flatly. "Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. We're almost done. The ceremony's just 20 minutes. Then we'll take some photos, cut the cake, and be out of your hair." I looked her dead in the eye. "You really think I'm going to let you finish this wedding after everything you've pulled?" Karen dropped the smile. "Don't do this. Not now." "No, you don't do this," I snapped. "You lied to the entire HOA. You forged authority you don't have. You brought strangers onto my property without permission. You let vendors into my garage, and worst of all, you're standing here acting like it's no big deal." She scoffed. "Jake, you're making a scene." I pulled out my phone, tapped a few buttons, and showed her a live feed of my backyard from the security cameras. "Everything you've done today, it's on video. I've got footage of you walking through my side gate, giving people orders, directing vendors. That's all I need." Karen turned pale. "Jake," she said, trying to lower her voice, "can we talk privately?" "Too late for that," I said. "You made this public the second you invited 100 people to my yard." Then I saw him, Tom, the only level-headed HOA board member I respected. He had just arrived and looked confused. I waved him over. "Tom," I said, "come here for a second." He walked up slowly. "What's going on, you tell me," I said. "Did the board approve this event on my private property?" Tom frowned. "No, Karen said you'd agreed to host. She said it was cleared." I looked at Karen. "You lied to the board." Karen raised her voice, trying to shift the blame. "Jake agreed verbally weeks ago. He must have forgotten." I held up my phone again. "I've got texts and emails. I never agreed to anything. And there's no HOA policy that gives you the right to take over someone's private yard." Tom's face darkened. "Karen, did you really fake approval for this?" "It's my daughter's wedding," she snapped. "You want to be the one to ruin it?" Tom shook his head. "You didn't even run this through a vote. That's fraud." I nodded. "And trespassing, and property damage, and about 5 other things my attorney's writing up right now." Karen looked like she was about to combust. She opened her mouth to shout something, but the music shifted. The wedding was starting. The bridesmaids were already walking down the makeshift aisle. Karen panicked. "Jake," she whispered, suddenly desperate. "Just let the ceremony happen. Just 20 minutes. Then we'll be gone. I'll clean everything up myself, I swear." I leaned in close. "You made a big mistake today, Karen, and it's about to blow up in your face." I walked away, heading toward my garage. Karen chased after me for a few steps, but then the music got louder and she was pulled back into her hostess role. I hit record on my phone and walked back inside. And then the tipping point hit. A guest knocked on my front door. I opened it. A woman I'd never seen before stood there holding a crying toddler. "Hi, sorry to bother you," she said. "Karen said we could use the bathroom inside." I stared at her. "No, you can't." "Oh, there's a line for the portable ones and it's kind of urgent. Karen doesn't live here." "This is my house." "Oh," she said. She made it sound like this was part of the venue. I didn't say anything. I just stepped back and shut the door. I stood there for a second, breathing deeply. I had everything I needed. It was time. My phone buzzed, a text from Evan. "By the way, I contacted local code enforcement. Karen violated multiple event permits and noise ordinances. They're sending someone over now." I smiled. Karen had pushed it too far. She thought I was just another quiet neighbor she could bully into silence. She thought the HOA gave her a blank check to do whatever she wanted. But not today. I wasn't just taking my yard back. I was about to show her what real consequences looked like. I stood in my garage, staring at the rusty metal valve. It was connected to the old sprinkler system I hadn't used in years, because the water it pumped was basically swamp runoff. Iron, dirt, even a faint sewage stench on humid days. It was disgusting. But today, it was perfect. Karen wanted my yard for a wedding. She was getting all of it. The caterers were rolling out trays of food, placing them carefully on long tables draped in white linen. Some guy was adjusting a projector screen by my back fence. And the guests, they were starting to settle into their seats. I gave it 10 more minutes. Then I heard the knock at my door again. I opened it, half expecting another stranger asking to use the bathroom. But this time, it was someone else, Stephanie, the bride. She looked stressed, her hair done up in a way that made her look older than she probably was. Her dress was pristine. Too pristine for a backyard like mine. "Hi," she said, hesitant. "Are you Jake?" I nodded slowly. "Look, I know this is weird. I only just found out this morning that this was someone's private home. I thought my mom had rented a venue. I didn't know it was your house." I raised an eyebrow. She didn't just skip the rental. She forged HOA approval and ignored property lines. Stephanie let out a breath and looked down. I don't want to defend her. She's been difficult about this whole wedding. Took control of everything. I just wanted a simple ceremony. She turned it into a circus. I folded my arms. "Then why are you still standing out there in a wedding dress?" she shrugged. "Because it's still my wedding day, and I didn't want to start it with a screaming match. I figured once the ceremony's done, we'll never need to talk to the neighbors again." I said nothing. Not because I didn't have thoughts, but because I knew what was coming, and part of me almost felt bad for her. Almost. Stephanie shifted on her heels. "I just wanted to say thanks for not blowing it up." I gave her a tight smile. "Don't thank me yet," she paused. "What does that mean?" "I think you'll see soon." She frowned, but before she could say anything, Karen's voice cut across the yard. "Stephanie, come on, the music's starting." Stephanie gave me a long look before turning and walking away. Back inside, I checked the camera feed again. Guests were seated. The music was starting. Karen stood at the front like she was officiating the thing herself. And then, the cue. The wedding march began. Stephanie stepped into the yard, her father escorting her toward the archway they'd placed next to my koi pond. And that was it. I walked into the garage, reached down, and opened the valve. Chaos hit in under 10 seconds. The first sprinkler head popped with a loud hiss, followed by a violent burst of muddy, iron-heavy water shooting 6 feet into the air. Guests in the front row were instantly soaked. Screams rang out. Then the rest of the system kicked in. Every single sprinkler across the lawn erupted like a geyser. Rusty brown water sprayed in wild arcs, covering dresses, suits, floral arrangements, everything. The white chairs, now stained tan. The cake, toppled under a torrent of foul water. The DJ's speakers sparked as water drenched the cables. The music cut off in a staticky squeal. Someone slipped in the mud and fell into a table full of champagne glasses. and Karen, she lost it. She sprinted across the yard, heels sinking into the wet grass, screaming at no one in particular. Turn it off right now. But no one was listening. Guests were panicking, grabbing purses and coats, trying to cover their heads and escape the disgusting downpour. Some shouted at her, some cursed. One guy in a soaked tuxedo yelled that he wanted his gift back. The bride, Stephanie, stood in stunned silence, her white dress now dripping with dark brown sludge. Her mouth hung open as she stared down at her ruined gown, speechless. And finally, Karen locked eyes with me. I stepped out onto my porch, arms crossed. "You did this," she shouted, stomping toward me through the mud like a deranged scarecrow. "You're going to pay for this." I didn't flinch. "You mean your illegal wedding on private property, without permission? You brought this on yourself." She pointed a shaking, soaking wet hand at me. "You ruined the most important day of my daughter's life." I looked over at Stephanie, still standing frozen, her father trying to wipe gunk off her veil. "Pretty sure you did that," I said. And then, right on cue, a city code enforcement SUV rolled up. A tall guy in a reflective vest stepped out, looked at the muddy yard, and raised an eyebrow. "Who's the property owner here?" I raised my hand. "That's me." "And who authorized the event?" Karen rushed forward. "I did. I'm the HOA president." The inspector frowned. "I see. Did you pull a permit for this?" Karen hesitated. I'm with the HOA. We're allowed to." "Nope," he interrupted. "HOAs can't authorize events on private property without explicit permission. That's city code, and based on what I'm seeing here, you're in violation of at least 5 ordinances." Karen looked like she was about to faint. "This is a misunderstanding." But the inspector was already writing something on his tablet. "I'm going to need you to shut this down immediately, and you'll be hearing from the city attorney." Karen tried to argue, but it was useless. The guests were already leaving. Stephanie was in tears. David, the groom, was nowhere to be seen. I turned and walked back inside, dripping sprinkler water trailing from my shoes, and shut the door behind me. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more piece of the puzzle. Because not only had Karen broken city laws, she'd used HOA funds to do it, and I had the receipts to prove it. After the chaos finally died down and the last guest had either stormed off or was huddled in their car wiping off sludge, I stood by the window and watched Karen sink into one of the few remaining dry chairs. Her face was pale. She looked like she'd just survived a tornado. Except in this case, she was the tornado, and she was realizing it way too late. But the day wasn't over, because what Karen didn't know was that the HOA's financial records weren't locked behind some secure system. In fact, earlier in the week, after hearing rumors about her shady spending, I'd gotten a copy of the HOA's quarterly report from Tom. Tom wasn't just on the board. He was the treasurer, and he was just as tired of Karen's dictatorship as the rest of us. He'd sent me a PDF that broke everything down, line by line, and there it was, over $8,000 listed under event coordination expenses. Except the HOA hadn't had an official event in over a year, so where did it go? Catering, equipment rentals, floral arrangements, same names, same totals. All matching the invoices left behind in my yard that day. She hadn't just hijacked my property. She used the community's money to do it. The next morning, Tom called. "It's happening," he said. "What is?" "Emergency HOA meeting. 6 p.m. at the community center. We're bringing the receipts." That was all I needed to hear. By 6 o'clock, the room was packed. More people than I'd ever seen at any HOA meeting. Usually they were ghost towns with Karen sitting at the front like she was running a courtroom. But not tonight. Tonight she was facing the crowd from the middle of the room. No special chair, no podium, just another homeowner surrounded by angry neighbors. Tom stood up front with a folder in his hand, calm, collected. He wasn't a loud guy, but tonight every word hit like a hammer. "I'd like to begin by addressing the event that took place yesterday." Murmurs spread. Everyone had seen the aftermath. Some had watched the sprinkler disaster unfold in real time on social media. Turns out several guests had live-streamed the chaos. The clips had gone semi-viral overnight. Tom continued, "We've received multiple complaints and I've personally reviewed the budget allocations for the last 2 quarters. What I found was disturbing." He held up the printed reports. Thousands of dollars were spent on vendors that serviced a private wedding. A wedding that was not approved by the board, not voted on by homeowners, and, most importantly, hosted on private property without consent. All eyes turned to Karen. She stood up. This is all being blown out of proportion. The event was intended to be a community celebration. It was going to benefit us all. Tom shook his head. You didn't consult anyone. You didn't even attempt to hold a vote. You used HOA funds for your daughter's wedding and you trespassed on someone's yard to do it. Someone in the back muttered, "Shameful." Karen started to sweat. We've done worse things with HOA money. We paid for new signage. We paid for the holiday decorations. And all of that was voted on, Tom replied. Properly recorded in the minutes, this wasn't. And now the city's involved. That quieted the room. Tom looked around. The city code inspector filed a report. They confirmed that no permits were issued for the event, and they're looking into possible misuse of funds, which means we're looking at potential legal charges. Karen's voice cracked. You're just doing this to embarrass me. Tom leaned in. You embarrassed yourself. Then he turned to the room. Per our bylaws, if 2/3 of the homeowners vote in favor, we can remove a board member. I'd like to propose a vote for immediate removal of Karen Whitman from the HOA board, effective tonight. There was silence. Then a hand went up. Then another. Then dozens. People stood calling for a show of hands. It was overwhelming. Karen's eyes darted from face to face, realizing just how alone she'd become. The vote passed, 87%. Tom nodded. Effective immediately, Karen is no longer president or a member of the board. The remaining members will meet tonight to appoint an interim president until we hold a formal election. Karen sat back down, stunned. But it wasn't over. Another neighbor stood, a quiet older man who rarely said anything at meetings. And what about the funds she spent? Are we just going to let her walk away with all that money gone? Tom shook his head. No, we're submitting everything to our attorney and the city's fraud department. If the investigation confirms she misappropriated funds, and it looks like they will, she'll be liable for repayment. And possibly criminal charges. Karen tried to speak, but the room was done listening. She got up and walked out alone. No one followed. I left a few minutes later and headed home. My yard still looked like a wedding war zone, but I didn't care. The arch was tipped over. Folding chairs still littered the grass. The grass itself, brown and soggy in most places. But the air was quiet, peaceful. The war was over. Later that night, I got a text from Tom. Audit underway. She's in deep. Thanks for standing your ground. HOA just got a lot better. I didn't reply. Just stared at the mess in my backyard. The mess she left behind, and felt a weight finally lift off my shoulders. For years, Karen had been the queen of this neighborhood. But one wedding, one lie, one stupid assumption that I'd just roll over, and she brought it all crashing down. And the best part, she didn't expect a thing. It was a week later, and my yard still smelled like swamp water and regret. The arch had been removed by some wedding rental company that had no idea what they were stepping into. The chairs, still there, stacked haphazardly in one corner, stained and warped from days of moisture. The flowers had withered into brown mush, and the lawn looked like someone had driven a backhoe through it blindfolded. But the important part, Karen was gone. After the emergency meeting and her removal from the board, she hadn't shown her face once in public. The only sign of life at her house was the for sale sign that popped up 3 days later. Big, bold letters. Price reduced. Tom dropped by with coffee that Saturday morning. He leaned against the porch post and handed me a steaming cup. Enjoying the quiet, I nodded. More than you know. He sipped and glanced at the wrecked yard. We're going to reimburse you, by the way. The HOA board voted on it unanimously. You're getting a full property repair budget pulled from the remaining general fund. I raised an eyebrow. Even after the mess she left behind, Tom smirked. Especially after the mess she left behind. The new board agreed. You earned that much. Turns out, once Karen was gone, the neighborhood started changing fast. Residents who used to stay quiet were now stepping up, offering help, organizing real community events, not mandatory ones. The paranoia, the fines, the nonsense, all of it was going out with the old board. But that wasn't the end of Karen's problems. 2 days after her removal, the city's financial fraud department sent a letter to the new board. Preliminary review of the HOA funds showed a long trail of questionable transactions, and Karen's name was tied to all of them. Catering services billed directly to her daughter's name. Transport and daycare booked using HOA routing information. Dozens of reimbursements signed off without supporting invoices. In short, she was cooked. An HOA board member from 3 years ago came forward and admitted Karen used to submit emergency expense claims without documentation. Turns out she'd been using the HOA like her personal checkbook for years. People just never questioned her, until now. The city began preparing charges, and once word got around that she might be facing real fraud allegations, Karen did what Karen always does when cornered. She ran. A neighbor spotted her loading her SUV in the dead of night. No goodbye, no apology, just 2 suitcases and her little yappy dog. By the time the city's investigator knocked on her door, it was empty, gone, vanished. She didn't even take the for sale sign with her. The fallout was like a domino effect. The title company froze the sale of her house due to the pending fraud investigation. Her bank account, the one tied to HOA reimbursements, got flagged. And her daughter, yeah, the wedding might have been canceled by dirty sprinkler water, but the engagement ended too. David, the groom, stopped by a few days after the meeting. I found him standing at the edge of the wrecked lawn, hands in his pockets, just shaking his head. "Hell of a day that was," he said. I nodded. "You dodged a bullet." He gave a small laugh. "More like a missile." Turned out he and Stephanie had talked briefly after the wedding imploded. But it didn't go well. She was still clinging to the idea that the wedding could have been salvaged, that I overreacted, that her mom was just trying her best. That was all David needed to hear. He ended it, and honestly, I didn't feel sorry for her. Not after the way she stood there watching me lose my yard to a fake wedding. If you defend that kind of behavior, you're not innocent. You're complicit. Anyway, with Karen gone and the board reset, life got back to normal fast. But even normal started feeling better. Neighbors smiled more. Kids played on the sidewalk again without getting yelled at for riding bikes too fast. People stopped avoiding eye contact at the mailbox. I started hosting weekend barbecues, just casual ones. No themes, no RSVPs, no Karen barging in to tell us the patio umbrella was the wrong color. One Saturday, a few weeks later, Tom stopped by again. He had a big manila envelope in his hand. "Figured you'd want to see this." He handed it to me. Inside were full-color printouts of Karen's HOA fund reports, marked with the city investigator's notes. The last page had the final summary: subject, Karen Whitman, status, warrant issued for financial fraud, misappropriation of community funds, and criminal trespassing. Note, subject failed to appear for questioning. Currently considered a fugitive in an ongoing investigation. I let out a low whistle. "Guess she's not coming back anytime soon," Tom chuckled. "Only way she's coming back is in handcuffs." I taped the last page to the inside of my garage door, just for me, my own private little trophy. Not long after that, the community held an HOA vote, not just for board members, but for whether the HOA should exist at all. It was close, but the yes, dissolve it side won by 6 votes. That meant no more board, no more rules about mailbox colors, no more Karen-style dictatorship in waiting. People celebrated that weekend like we'd all been released from some bizarre suburban prison, and my yard, I finally got it resodded. New grass, new fence, and I added a small sign next to the garden, white letters on a simple wooden post. Private property, no weddings. It was a joke mostly, but also not. Every time I sat out there, cold drink in hand, lawn chair tilted back just right, I looked at that sign and smiled. Karen had spent years treating the neighborhood like her kingdom. But she forgot one thing: you don't throw a wedding in someone's yard without asking. And you definitely don't steal from the whole community to do it. In the end, she didn't just lose the wedding, she lost everything: her power, her home, her reputation, and probably her freedom too. I got my peace and quiet back, and for the first time in years, my yard stayed mine, exactly how it should be.